Welcome, everybody, to Merle's Pearls of Business Wisdom, where I, Merle M. Singer, the relationship miracle worker, talk about all things relationship and how they impact the workplace. Now, instead of a particular topic today, we're going to have a fabulous guest. Yes, I love it. Her name is Kim Hamer, and I'm going to read her bio so I get it all right. Okay. And I'm reading it off my phone, which is kind of
Ooh.
cool. I like that. So, on April 16th, 2009, Kim Hamer witnessed her 44-year-old husband take his last breath. The outpouring and support from her coworkers, her bosses, friends, and family during his illness and following his death left an indelible impression on her. As an HR leader, Kim recognized death's profound impact on work. Leaders are ill equipped to lead grieving teams. HR is not prepared to support leaders, and employees have no direct support in managing their own grief at work. All of this causes a negative impact on engagement, mental health, and a company's revenue. Aha, let's get to the bottom line, she says. Using her personal and professional experience, Kim founded Workplace Grief, a wellness platform for leaders, HR, and employees. It's a one-stop shop for grief in the workplace. She's author of 100 Acts of Love, a girlfriend's guide to loving your friend, wow, through cancer or loss. An invaluable and must-have life guide offering practical tips to support employees or friends experiencing life's little hiccups. They never seem like hiccups, do they? And a captivating speaker. Her stories empower audiences to navigate the complexity of life, fostering a culture of compassion and resilience, uh, professional or personal. Learn more about workplace grief at, guess what? Workplacegrief.com. How did you think of that for a website? I've got to get myself up higher. So, welcome, Kim. And I guess we can tell everyone that uh, we knew each other many, many years ago and have reconnected. And I remember you were going through, so that's how we know how long ago it
Yeah,
was.
I know exactly. It's been quite a few years.
And yes, everything that affects a person that works affects the workplace.
It does. Yeah, it does. And I think that's something that um, workplaces are finally beginning to realize. I mean, we talk about COVID, and COVID caused this kind of great shift in workplaces understanding that they have to take a bigger present role in their employees' lives if they want to succeed in business.
Yeah, yeah. So because now they're deciding, are they going to let them come back to work, or no, let them stay home, or insist that they come back?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yep.
these are questions. These are.
Yeah.
I want to know. When I read that, there was something I didn't know. What was it? It was about what did you call that? Oh, duh, the thing at the bottom. Workplace grief. Yeah. So what kind of a program can you create for businesses?
So thank you for asking. It's a brand new name. Hopefully by the time this is out, it will be I bought the URL. I've got to get it hooked up to my old one. So I'll be doing that hopefully later today or Friday. Um, what I do, this is morphed. For a while, I was consulting directly with companies and with managers and leaders who are dealing with employee loss right then and there. And I wanted to make sure that I had a larger impact. And I also wanted to, what I also started to see were patterns. There were certain things that leaders always asked, always wanted to know, always needed support on. So that's where the platform idea came about. It's an on demand platform that offers training and support based by category to leaders. It helps HR, mostly HR in small, mid to small to mid cap companies. So companies less than 20,000 people who don't necessarily have a whole system set up to support employees
Is it
who are
like an
dealing.
app?
It is a platform. So we're building an app that will go with it, but that probably won't be done till the end of the year. So right now, what it is it's a platform that, like, say, Google would purchase, and then anyone, we work within companies' current learning and development training systems, or we provide our own. And so what would happen is HR would get a call and say, "Hey, this employee died," most likely from the leader. Or from one of the people, and HR would go about verifying that, and then they would let the leader know, and let the leader know, "Hey, here's some training that we have available. Here are the first 3 steps we want you to take." And then after that, here's what we want you to think about. We're going to bring in this grief counselors for this many days. Here's what we want you to message to the team. After when you're in the first week, one of the biggest priorities managers have is understanding what work was that employee doing. Right? We need to know what's happening. So here's how you're going to figure out what work that employee is doing. I think the the platform provides that piece of it, and then there's the additional coaching that comes with it. So let's say a manager on day 4 is like, "I don't understand these directions," or, "I've got something that's different that I don't see being addressed here." They call, and they have an on-demand person there ready to support and help them through whatever difficulty there is. I think what most managers feel when someone on their team dies is they have this, "Oh my gosh, I feel horrible. This person has died" reaction. And then they have this, "Holy crap. Like, I need to know what this person is doing. This project's going to fall apart." And they feel guilty for that. They feel bad, like they shouldn't feel that way. And what I do and what the platform does is it normalizes that. So it provides a really nice mix of how to be empathetic and understanding to your team and to yourself, but also how to get stuff done when it is chaotic and there's a lot of grieving happening directly on your team.
So, is that based on the employee passing away or someone close to the employee passing?
It's for both. So I have worked with leaders helping them go back into the workforce after the death of after having a significant loss, um, and employees as well. So usually what I've done in the past is I will get a call about an employee. They're coming back to work. They're really nervous about it. I will coach that employee, but I will also then work with the manager and the team on making sure that they understand how this person might show up and the effects of grief and how it's going to show up in their work, and how to handle that during the first 6 to 8 weeks usually. So there's that piece of it. And then there is also the piece of an employee dying, a team member dying, heart attack, car accident, suicide, all those things. And how does a manager lead a team that's grieving that loss?
Do you ever work with family of?
I do not. I want to say there's so much support, but that's not true. But there is a lot of support for families. And that is not, I am not a grief specialist. I am a grief I kind of call myself like a death advisor. So
Yes.
so I help companies understand how grief manifests itself and what they can do to to make sure that the manifestation doesn't take out the team. Excuse me, or decrease revenue or increase absenteeism. So that's what I do. There are a lot of other organizations that do support families and children. Not enough, but there are organizations that do support families and children when they have a significant loss.
It's interesting. It's so what happened to you and what were you doing when your husband was ill? I mean, what job, what were you doing?
So I was a freelance writer at that point. I was writing for some small newspapers local to LA, and he was diagnosed, and that was the first time. The second time he was diagnosed, I was starting a consulting firm helping people afford and get into private school. So he was a private school administrator. We had had experience with private school. So I had this business on the side that I was trying to run while I started it in between his cancer diagnosis. And it was extremely challenging. I had clients who, at one point, I had to actually pass them off to another consultant because I could not take care of them and also
Too
manage
much in your
this.
head.
Yeah, it was too much in my head. And three kids. My kids were 12, 9, and 7 when he died. So they were fairly young and
Yeah,
trying to manage their lives. And my husband was very much a co-parent. He didn't have the kind of job that required him to leave the house at 6 and he didn't get back till 8. He would leave the house at 7 and be back at 5. And
yeah,
so he was very involved. And I lost my cousin likes to joke and say I lost a wife.
yeah,
But I lost him before he even died because the chemo really did a
yes,
number on his brain.
yes, yeah. That's how is it? How do you go from grieving to normal life again?
Hmm. That's a great question, Merle. And I wish I was like, here you go. Here's steps 1 through 10. Just follow these and everything will be great again. Um, so I do want to talk a little bit about the what happens in your brain when you grieve. Recently, they've been putting people in functional MRIs and they can see grief on the brain. We often think that grief is this feeling, right? It's this, you just need to get over it. Well, in reality, there are mechanisms that occur in your brain that change. So it's no longer about getting over it. It is literally a thing that happens. Grief affects your brain. So it does this in two different ways. So the first thing is when we think about longing, we long for something. And I'm trying to remember what his name is. I think it's Tantalus. He came before the Greek gods, so he was the precursor before the Greek gods, but there was a story that he was in hell. It was, his Hades, whatever you call it, and he was always thirsty and always hungry. And right in front of him was a fruit tree. And every time he'd reach to take a piece of fruit, the fruit would reach out of the way. And the water was right below him. And every time he would go to scoop up water so he could drink it, the water would recede. So he constantly had this longing. When we grieve, it causes a dopamine effect on our body. Now we think dopamine is like the feel good drug, but dopamine is the longing drug. Dopamine is the not the drug, but is the hormone that causes us to want something, right? So addicts, they want that dopamine hit. They're craving to feel good again. So that's the first thing that happens in the brain is you get this dopamine hit. So you're craving to see the person. And it's not about you craving um you just need to get over the craving or anything else like that. It is literally about that you're having a hit of this stuff that's causing you to crave. Now, the other thing that happens in your brain is so when we think about people, if you think about anybody right now, I want you to picture anybody you care about. You sort of know where they are. And even if they're on the other side of the world, you know how to reach them. And if you needed to see them, it would take you a certain amount of time. So we've got these three concepts going. When someone dies, and that's how we map people in our brains. That's how we map animals. That's how we map our friends. If we haven't seen a friend for a long time, we map where we think we saw them the last time, where we know we saw them the last time. We think about, what we did with them the last time. And then we build these little memories around those things. So you've got these dimensions. And when somebody dies, you can't reach out to them in space and time. There's nowhere you can find them. And it causes your brain literally has to restructure itself. Neurons need to reconnect in different ways for you to get past that moment. In the meantime, now you've got all these memories that you have of them. And if it's someone who's in your home every day, you are constantly building these memories, right? You're building them when they said goodbye this morning. You're building them because you're pissed because they didn't put the dishes away they didn't load the dishwasher. You're building them because they left their socks on the floor. There's these constant memories. So when someone dies, your brain is trying to remap itself to reorient where they are. You're having this huge longing, this desire to see them. And all of a sudden, all these memories you have of them are cut off. So you're still in the memory, like he was just here yesterday. He was just here last week. He was just here a month ago. So all these reoccurring memories are still there. And to get past that takes time. Now, not the neat thing, but the interesting about grief is that some people don't feel as grieved as somebody else. And that usually has to do with the amount of recent memories that we have. So if a friend of mine who I haven't talked to in 3 years dies, I hear that he dies, I'm going to feel sad and I'm going to remember the last time we talked, but it's not going to affect me nearly as much as my other friend who just talked to him last week. So grief comes, it affects us in different ways. That's one level. And then the other level is if we haven't if we had someone die in our past and we haven't dealt with that grief, that can come back. So that feeling of loss and being unhappy and being scared can return can be triggered by a recent loss. So sometimes I'll hear an employee go, I wasn't even that close to them and I'm crying like a baby. And I'll say, has anyone else died in the last 5 years in your life?
I see what you're saying.
And they're like, yeah, my friend died. And I don't think, and we start talking and they realize, oh, this grief that I'm feeling for my employee is actually not about this employee. It's actually about the friend. So you've got all these complicated things happening in your brain, and that affects how we work. It affects how we show up. It affects our temperament. It affects our ability to focus. It affects our ability to get stuff done. And yet, at work, nobody really talks about it. They usually bring in an employee assistance program, crisis management. They offer counseling for a day or two. They tell employees, hey, we have this EAP, employee assistance program. Give them a call if you're dealing with it. But most employee assistance program, you get 3 or 4 calls. And that's not enough to process the grief. The other thing is that grief one of the best ways you can process it is actually as a group. It's really helpful to know that other people are grieving, no matter what level they're grieving on. And so it's important that a team can come together and have that space to know that we're all grieving. That actually decreases the negative I don't know if it's negative feelings, but it decreases the negative effects of grief on a workplace.
So that's why they have funerals or Jews sit Shiva.
Yes. Yes. In every single society, in every single culture in the world, they have a ritual of becoming an adult
Yeah.
and a ritual of death
Wow. And
because it
birth.
marks a transition. I haven't done the research about the birth yet. And some cultures don't, they will couple, but they don't have like a wedding like we do. So
Oh,
that is not always across all cultures.
right. Right. That's that's fascinating. Another thing. So you talked about the distance from which the time distance from you that you last seen the person. So is there a difference between a neighbor who you saw yesterday and your child or your mother or somebody that you lives on the other coast or something?
Yeah, so the biggest difference with the level of grief is the relationship. So it's for instance, I saw my sons at Christmas. If I don't see them for 6 months, but I see my neighbor every day and my neighbor dies, I don't have that connection with my neighbor just
Right,
because we see each other every day.
right,
So the connection is really built up over time.
right,
So if I'm an employee and I've worked at the same place for 17 years and I've seen this person every day or every work day for the last 17 years, that relationship is when that person's gone,
yes,
that's going to hurt a
yes,
lot. And it may actually even hurt more than your aunt
yes,
who died, who you don't really know very well. You see her
right,
at family gatherings, you don't really talk a lot.
right,
So there the idea that someone that the level of grief is related to their familial relationship is not always true. And I think that's
right,
sometimes where companies also downgrade or don't realize how important it is to talk about when an employee dies because we don't know, companies don't know that relationship that employee had to
that's
these
right,
people.
that's right. Or to anybody, actually.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. And, I want to be fair to organizations. They're under a lot of stress right now. Now, yes, there are companies that are making gazillion dollars. I get it. And that's, that they seem to
Their
be making it
job.
on, that's their job. And they seem to be making it, sometimes really in a good way and sometimes not in a bad way. And honestly, if we don't buy it, they don't make it. But the thing where was I going with this point? So companies are under a lot of stress because a lot of the things that were around to support society in the 50s and 60s and 70s is no longer around. And I think, when you think about small towns and churches and, communities and lodges, the Lions Lodge, the Rotary Club, those were traditionally places where people could meet and support each other and build that community. Now they weren't, I'm not saying that they were the end all be all, there were some that were, oh, look at that, my bubble just popped. Ah, that's really freaky, Zoom. I don't, if you're listening to this, what just happened is I gave a thumbs up and then Zoom put a bubble thumbs up. So it saw me do it and then it repeated. That was really bizarre. Okay. Technology for you. Um, so, and we've seen this happening at schools. Before your kids went to school, they were at school around 8 or 9, and they were let out of school at 3 to 4. Then schools started to have aftercare, and then they started to have morning care because people were working and they needed to work. It's not like, mothers are like, "Yay, I want to go back to work somewhere," but people needed to work to be able to live a decent life. So schools started taking on more and more responsibility. First, it was just feeding kids. Then it became feeding kids and tutors. And then it became feeding kids and doing the laundry and after school and tutors. So now schools have psychologists and counselors. They have nurses. They have before care and after care for kids to take care of them all day long. And now companies are finding that they're going to have to start doing this as well because one, we are not, our numbers, our unemployment has not been so low for so long.
Right.
And this has been coming for many, and HR I know this. It's been coming for many, many years. We've seen this with the birth rate dropping. We knew this was coming. But we kind of like, oh, it's all good. We're good. But now there's no getting rid of someone and finding someone to replace them right away. That isn't happening anymore. And so companies, and now we've got a big, huge mental health crisis, which was brewing before COVID, but now has really kind of reached it's blown up. Exactly. We see this. We see it with people dying, and we saw it with suicides, increase in suicides. The interesting fact, Merle, the highest rate, this was done, I saw a study last year. The group that has the most increased suicides are white males between the ages of 45 and 60. So it's even the demographic of people who we think are normal and okay and are feeling fine are not normal and okay. So companies are having to pick up the slack. And at first it started with, hey, we know that if we measure the engagement of our employees, we can measure their productivity and their output, and we can also measure our revenue. So companies started doing that. And then diversity became a really big thing. And it was a big thing before George Floyd, but it really took off after that. Hey, we know that if diverse, we're going to increase our revenue by 33, we're going to outperform our competitors. So diversity became a thing. Then it was well-being. And now it's mental health, right? Because well-being kind of got structured down into this mental health section. And what we're seeing is we're putting all this pressure on managers, and we're like, oh, and by the way, you got to meet your KPIs. Don't forget to get those goals done. And so managers aren't trained to deal with this. And it's just like teachers originally, when you go to a teacher training and you graduate with a teacher degree, you get a limited amount of mental health understanding, right? Your whole training is how to help students learn and check for their learning so that they're ready. It is not on how do you deal with a child who is who's not being fed at home. It's not on how do you deal with a child who's being abused. It's not on how do you deal with a child who doesn't have a home. That's not what teachers are trained on. And now some people are even saying teachers should have guns to protect against, right? So it's crazy that we as a society are now putting this huge amount of pressure on these two things that hold our society together right now: schools and work. And it is what it is. So companies really need to start to sit up and take stock and say, okay, we need to figure out a way to support our whole employee, even if they don't want to bring them whole selves to work, which I don't like that saying. But even if they don't want to bring, we still need to figure out a way to support that even unseen part of them at work. We need to figure this out. And that's why I do what I do, because grief is everywhere, where most people are carrying it around. I focus mostly on death because it's such a pinnacle moment in a career. It's a pinnacle moment for a leader. It is often, I talk to leaders all the time who say, I wish I saw you, I wish I knew you 3 years ago, or 20 years ago, because losing that employee was the most difficult career thing, most difficult leadership challenge I have ever been through. um, so that's why I do what I do, is really narrow, because it brings up so much stuff. There's great ways companies can learn to support employees, even while, and also support them through this grief process.
It's
I
a big
talked a lot.
thing. No, no, it's good, good. Um, I think what you're saying is, at least it's one, we are not dealing with mental health as a society, certainly in the United States, in a way that's even close. So this is at least a piece of that.
Exactly. And things that the leaders learn in our platform and through coaching, they're not just for death. Leaders can continue to use those skill sets beyond just this crisis. And
And
I think that
the
the
that skill set is thinking about and noticing and dealing with the other person.
yes, yes. We're skilling leaders up to have a higher emotional intelligence.
Yes.
And that side of it is, so that there's two sides of that, right? The leader has to be willing, which usually happens when there's a death. They're out of their mind, they're crazy, they don't know what they're doing, they're open and they're willing. And then they have to be able to practice it in a place that's safe. And you can't make a workforce safe unless HR understands what's happening within the organization, unless the leader above understands what's happening in the organization, understands what's happening with the grief on the team. And then they have that really solid knowledge. Like, no one, people don't know that grief changes your brain. People
Right.
feel like it's just a feeling. It's not. So when you provide that information for everybody, and then I forgot to add the one thing that we also have on our platform are nudges. So, we all
Oh,
know that
right.
there's information, right? There's information we love to talk about, right? We're going to talk about that. We forgot about
Yes.
that. So, so it's one thing to watch a video, but imagine what happens when you watch a video about how to do something, a 3-minute video about how to do something. And then 2 hours later, you get a nudge of what was your favorite part? What's the thing you remember the most about the video? And then a day later, you get, have you implemented that thing today? And then a week later, you get another little nudge. It helps retain and helps people practice what they've learned. Because even with my best intentions, I have books on the shelf that I have read that I need to reread because I don't remember what's in them. I think I implemented one thing out of the 55, right? So we all need those nudges, and that's a part of the platform that I'm very proud of, because it's not just shoving training down your throat and here's a video and good luck. It is in the
Right.
combination with the nudges and the coaching, the leaders are retaining information that helps them through this difficult challenge, but also helps them become better leaders.
That sounds awesome. Huh? So I had one last question about grief, though. So that you didn't mention, I observe that some people, when dealing with grief, feel guilty when they release that grief, or when they're not bothered by it all day, every day, that they feel if they don't have that, oh, I'm so upset about him that I didn't really love him, her.
Yeah,
So what can you do about that?
I love that question, Merle. I love that because within our platform, that's something that we address. Um, because the shame of not feeling sad can lead to all sorts of really negative outcomes.
Yeah.
So making sure that it's clear, like I said, remember in the beginning, I said that leaders are like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry this person died. And then heck, I've got all these projects.
Right, excuse me.
Some leaders don't like the employee that died, didn't like the employee that died.
Oh,
And so
oh,
they're kind of like, I mean, as bad as it sounds, I'm kind of glad because they were getting ready to be fired anyway. There can be a sense of relief when there's a death. And there's no place for leaders or employees to express that. And that's another thing that we work on this platform. That's where the coaching comes in, is because with us, with the coaches, it is one of these, they know grief, right? And I make sure that they're executive coaches. So they're not grief coaches that are coaching executive. They're executive coaches that have experience, that have learned how to coach in grief, with grief. And one of the things that we talk about the taboo, right? And the taboo is, phew, thank God, because that was just, you know, and when you release it and there's no reaction to it, there's not like you can't say that. There's none of that. When you release that, the coach goes, huh, yeah, that must have been a real relief. It normalizes it.
yeah.
And then you don't have the shame or the guilt that comes behind it. But again, it is really about making sure that these topics are talked about within coaching sessions and within videos so that people know it's normal. If you don't feel anything, that may be totally normal. You may not have had a relationship with them. They may have been a total pain in their neck. You may not have liked them very much. You didn't want them dead, but you didn't like them. And then you see this whole team grieving and you're thinking there's something wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with you. So we work hard to make sure that we normalize no matter where anybody is on the spectrum. Because look, even the loss of an employee at the bare bones will affect your work, right? It'll affect your team and your work, whether it affects your work directly or affects your work because there's another employee on the team who's grieving the loss and you can't get the information from them. So it affects you. So just understanding that your reaction is your reaction. There's nothing wrong with it. It just is
Yeah.
I think a really important part of what we do and what the coaches do.
So what about what about the employee that had a loss, a, a true loss, somebody close to them
Mm-hmm.
that they are clearly sad about, but it's 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, and somebody tells a joke and they laugh and and then they feel guilty.
Yeah. So that is where the individual coaching is really powerful. We start out with sort of group coaching and talking to the teams and helping them understand here's how grief is going to show up for y'all. Like, right. So it's going to show up in this way, and it's going to show up in you feeling guilty about laughing about something or laughing about somebody. So again, I
So
don't
you
deal.
anticipate it almost.
Yeah, we just tell the aspects of it. And I think that's where a lot of EAPs fall short is they come
EAP.
in the crisis and they
What's
come
an
in to fix
EAP?
an employee assistance program.
I knew that.
So I know you did. You just did it to make sure everyone else out who's listening knows what it is. Um, and so an EAP comes in and they're crisis management. So they're like, people are falling apart right now. We just had a death. It's a suicide. Our team cannot work. We need someone to come in and talk to our team and just kind of calm everybody down, like just bring the chaos down a little bit. Some EAPs will offer individual coaching. They'll come on site and people can make appointments and 20-minute slots of just talking about their grief. So that's a crisis management piece. The bigger piece is that piece of, hey, everybody, this is how it's going to show up over the next 8 weeks, 9 weeks, 12 weeks, maybe even a year from now. And one of the ways we talk about that is that thing of I remember when Art died, I had a friend who used to leave me a joke on my answering machine. Remember answering machines, Meryl? Remember when we didn't have them? Um,
Actually,
so,
yes.
so she would leave a joke on my answering machine every Wednesday morning. And she would always call when I was trying to get the kids ready for school.
Right.
And she did that on purpose. And so I would get the kids out the door and I would go to the answering machine and I would listen to the messages. And, in the beginning, most of the messages were, oh my gosh, Kim, I'm so sorry. If you need anything, let me know, which we can talk about really briefly is the
Yes.
worst thing you can say.
Right.
It was all that, but she would leave these messages and I would laugh.
Yeah.
And and sometimes it was the only time during the day that I laughed.
Yeah. Right.
But understanding that laughter doesn't mean that you didn't love the person any
Absolutely.
less. It's a moment of like just that having that life. Grief is complicated. And depending on how the person died, it can become really complicated. So that's a very long way of telling you that to laugh in a moment after someone has died is normal. There's nothing wrong with it. Somebody else may not laugh because they just can't wrap their heads around it right now. And there's nothing wrong with them, and that's normal. The point is to normalize reactions across the team so that no one feels guilty or ashamed for the reaction they did or didn't have.
Yeah. That makes sense. What was that thing you were in at? I forgot what it was.
Oh, if you need anything, let me know.
Oh, yes. I want to hear about it.
So here's the thing. I have my book behind me. It's 100 Acts of Love, A Girlfriend's Guide to Loving Your Friend Through Cancer or Loss. And there's several different chapters that are based on areas. So there's a food chapter, and there's a car chapter, and there's a kid chapter, and there's a work chapter, all these sections of how you can help in those different sections. This tip is the only tip that has one whole chapter to itself. And I literally say, if you take nothing from this book, take this. And that is, do not say, if you need anything, let me know. Now, I know some of your audiences are like, oh my God, I say that all the time. I thought I was being helpful. And the reality is, look, none of us has been taught what to say. We
Right.
don't feel like saying I'm sorry is enough. We feel like we want to
Absolutely.
offer some support. But here's why that's not a great thing to say. And any version of it is, one, what is anything? Merle,
Right.
as you know, I had young kids. Did
Yes.
anything mean that you were going to go pick up my
Okay.
snot-nosed sneezing toddler at preschool and bring him home?
No.
Or did anything mean like, hey, I'll be happy to drop off a bottle of wine, right? So anything is too big a term. And now you've put the pressure. Here's number two, the reason why it's not helpful. Now you've put the pressure on the person whose life has already been turned upside down to figure out what they need. And I remember in the beginning, I had no idea what I needed. I knew meals were going to be helpful. So that was taken care of. I
Right.
knew getting the kids to school would be helpful. But beyond that, I had no idea what I needed. And it
Right.
was literally people who were coming and saying, hey, what about this? And I would like, oh, that's a great idea. Let's do it. That's another great idea. That's not such a great idea. Let's not do that. So it
Right.
was literally people coming forward with ideas. So you've now inadvertently put the pressure on the person who is under great duress to figure out what anything is.
Right.
The third reason it's not helpful, let's just say that they figure it out, that they say, okay, this is what I need.
Right.
One, they have to remember who said, if you need anything, let me know, to ask them. Right. And everyone's made that offer, so they have no idea. And two, you are asking them to take a huge risk. They are feeling vulnerable. They are out of their minds crazy right now. The floor has become the left wall.
Right.
And now you're asking them to be extremely vulnerable, to ask you to do something that you may not really want to do because anything was too big. And we're all aware that anything's too big. And to
Right.
risk them hearing you say no, they're not
Right.
going to do it.
Right.
Unless it is, the only time I think that this phrase is okay is when it is your bestest friend ever.
Yeah.
And you can call her at 2 a.m. and say, hey, I need you to come hold my hair because I'm vomiting, or I'm almost out of pasta right now. Can you run to the store? Right. So those are the only people
Right.
who you can say, if you need anything, let me know.
Right.
Everyone else, the best thing you can do, the very, very, very best thing you can do is be specific on how you can help and ask and offer more than once. Because I turned people down a lot. And then finally one day I needed that thing and I knew exactly who to call. So don't think just because you offered once that they don't need it. Offer more than once. Offer a couple times. Call them up. One of my favorite tips is call up someone on your way to the grocery store and say, I am going to the grocery store. Look into your fridge and tell me, what 5 things are you almost out of? And I'll pick them up for you and drop them off. Right. So it's a finite ask. It's very specific. You're letting them know you're not going to hang out. You don't need to, you're giving them the option to invite you into their home if they want to. But if they don't want to, I will drop them off. Right. So literally here's your bag. Love you so much. Hope everything's okay. Bye. Right. That is one of the best ways that you can support is be specific and let them know you're going to come in, do that thing, and then get the heck out. Because asking for help, we're not good at that. We've never been good at that. We're not good at that as a country. I don't think we're good at that in third world and in first world countries. They're not good
True.
at it in France and Germany either. You know, so I think it's really being very aware that when we put the pressure on the person to come to us to ask for help, chances are they are not going to come. They just aren't going to come. And then last thing I always say is we all have helping superpowers, things that we're really good at, and we just haven't recognized them. And so for me, I am not a cook. Do not ask me to bring you a meal. I get stressed out just thinking about putting meals together, like even for myself. But if you need something from the grocery store and
Right.
it needs to be ordered, I'm your gal. I
Yeah.
will go to the grocery store. I will meet that truck at 5 a.m. to make sure that you have that thing that you have.
Okay.
So we all have our superpowers, and sometimes they're making Excel spreadsheets, right? Pulling data and being able to make a really beautiful graph based on the data. Sometimes it's leading meetings. Sometimes our strength is telling stories. Sometimes our strength is cleaning a kitchen. If we're really good at, we really like it, that's a great offer to make. I would love to come over and clean your kitchen after dinner next week on Wednesday. right? So we all have helping superpowers, and usually they're found in the things that the day-to-day things that we do that we actually don't mind doing, that we enjoy. So that's what I'd like to leave with your audience.
I think that's brilliant
Oh,
because
thank
I
you.
certainly have said, if you need any help,
Hmm.
and I certainly, and I'm listening to you and saying, oh, I'm supposed to tell him what help I can offer. Oh, I have no idea what that is. I,
Exactly.
I will have to sit and think about. I have actually a really good neighbor that has just passed on Sunday,
Oh,
and it's I mean, there is what can you say? And I don't know how I can help her husband.
I think one of the best things you could do, just off the top of my head, is not now, but in 3 weeks, 4 weeks, even 6 weeks, go over and talk about
Yeah,
her to him.
yeah,
Go, remember that time we did that thing? I was just having these memories about her. And remember that time we did that thing? And he will probably cry,
yeah,
but he'll be crying for two reasons.
yeah,
One, because he'll miss her,
yeah,
but two, because he will realize that he's not the only one.
mm, yeah,
And that's what makes grief so isolating is we forget, this big thing has happened in our lives and we think we're the only ones. I love it. 10 years after Art died, one of his classmates reached out to me. He just found out and he told me this hysterical story about Art. I cherish that story. I love that story. And I love it because it was very much an Art story, but I also love it because it meant that he misses him too. On some level, he thinks about him.
yes,
And that makes me feel less alone. It's not just my loss anymore, it's
yeah,
our loss. And that
yeah.
makes a big difference.
It does make a big difference. Yeah, how can we
Mhm.
be talking about such seemingly down things, and they are downer things, but that is the mystery of life, is
Look,
the come.
we're all dying. I mean, I remember watching this video of this like 90-year-old woman, and she's like, you're dying. And she's like, I've been dying since I've been born. I just- It's true. And
Yeah,
it is an uncomfortable topic. And it's also one where we have so much power and ability to help and support others.
yes,
And that's why I want to bring back, I want people to feel the joy of knowing that they did something that helped another person.
yeah. Amen.
Amen.
I think that's an appropriate conclusion for our wonderful conversation. But before we go, perhaps we can change the tenor, topic, whatever. Let's sing something really here, Bobby. And but talk about, you said you just renamed this grief. What is it?
So my 100actsoflove.com is my website. And that will remain my website because that's where the information about the book and more personal about loss will be. But I now have a new website called Workplace Grief. And that's where organizations can go to understand more about the platform and how we can support them dealing with employee loss. And, one of the ways I serve organizations is we put together a leadership and death playbook. So we put together this it's not actually a book, but we put together this training so that leaders know where to go when there's a loss. So that workplacegrief.com will be that section of that part of the business.
Awesome, awesome. And it will be up and running. But
I'm hoping
by
to have it connected by tomorrow. So,
okay,
yeah, yeah.
so by the time we go live,
Yes, ma'am.
yes, ma'am, that's awesome. Okay, so I'm gonna go to my audience and thank them for listening to Merle's Pearls of Business Wisdom with me, your host, Merle M. Singer, the relationship miracle worker. And you can find this episode and all past episodes on relationshipmiracleworker.com/podcast. But you can, if that's easiest, fine. Otherwise, go to Apple or Amazon Music or Spotify, whatever platform you listen to your podcasts on, and listen and look for Merle's Pearls of Business Wisdom, and you will find this episode with Kim Hamer.
Woohoo!
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone. Merle, thank you so much. I really appreciate you. It's great to reconnect.
It was, yes, it is.